Alan Wake is a psychological action thriller by Remedy, much anticipated prior to its release for its use of physics, lighting effects, and a bold story. By the time that I first experienced the game, I had somewhat forgotten about it, perhaps due to it becoming a 360 exclusive and my long time away from horror games. By the time that the game was being played in my university house, I had found a taste for horror and mystery. I had recently finished watching all of Twin Peaks and wanted more. And what do you know? You wait around for a cult classic to turn up, and then two come at once. One was the fantastic, Deadly Premonition, and the other, of course, was Alan Wake. Both games clearly breathe Twin Peaks as their air.
Man, smell those trees. Smell those Douglas firs.
With locations, characters, themes, and idiosyncrasies that mirror the classic TV show. Or maybe there's something about Washington State and coffee that naturally leads to mystery and the dream realm. However, Alan Wake steps a little bit further beyond making itself the Twin Peaks game, openly admitting it to inspiration from Kubrick, King, and Hitchcock.
I had to figure a way out of this. Any second now and Stucky would be knocking on the door with his axe like Nicholson in The Shining.
That's not to say that Alan Wake doesn't become its own thing, as it certainly does, but surely the game stands on the shoulders of giants. Another aspect that originally had me apprehensive about Alan Wake before actually playing it was the light mechanic. It simply seemed too similar to the critically panned Alone in the Dark reboot. However, when it came to it, the aspect of balancing what is essentially two sets of ammunition works for the genre quite well. Shining a torch on an enemy slows them and also eventually makes them vulnerable to gunshot. Likewise, the gun can slow an enemy or finally kill them after the defense has been broken. Generally speaking, this concept still holds up well, but the whole scenario is somewhat cheapened by the massive push of Energizer batteries being ever present. Advertising in games generally doesn't bother me, but this is a concept that I'll come back to later for Alan. For now, let's just say that there's a kind of humor in squeezing a torch harder so that the baddies aren't so scary anymore. I can't tell if it was a conscious choice to make it apparent that the whole thing is in Wake's head, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself there. You do eventually start to think of the torch more pragmatically and less of it being a kind of joke or play on childish thought. That is to say that it soon becomes less absurd that you're waving a light about as a means to save your life. The camera is in third-person perspective, hanging behind Alan's left shoulder for the most part. This seems to be mostly to keep the torch central for the purpose of shooting, and also to help create moments of supposedly serendipitous camera framing. And when I first watched the game being played, I mostly just watched the game being played the first time about, it felt natural and flowing. However, playing this time around, it felt like having a stone in my shoe for the whole journey. I really wanted to frame Alan below the compass, his health bar, and the info tracker, to keep the right side of the screen free of clutter, so I could see the enemies coming. But I guess Remedy didn't want me to have that, and the camera would always reset after moving it to the side. And there aren't any in-game options to address this. Speaking of that flashlight, that comes in 3 versions: a simple flashlight, a slightly bigger one, and then a heavy-duty one. There might be more, but I honestly don't remember. Each progression basically increases the ammo of the light. It may offer a slight power boost, but I'm, again, not entirely sure. I didn't notice anything. Occasionally you'll find mounted floodlights or such things to take on a couple enemies at once, and then you can also pick up flares that have a fairly large AoE, but generally the enemies move away from these, so I just use it to reload or to allow myself to strategize. However, if you have a flare gun, it will shoot forwards and be able to take out 2 or 3 enemies entirely in one shot. And a step above that is the flashbang, somewhere between the flare gun and the flare in range, but twice the power. It obliterates enemies. The guns are less interesting, with a revolver, shotgun, pump-action shotgun, and a hunting rifle. They don't really offer anything new. However, the reload mechanic works really well. Tap X to reload, or repeatedly tap it to reload faster. This mechanic fits in with the genre and the idea of Wake panicking to reload each bullet, as you'll notice that all of these weapons are loaded with individual ammo rather than a clip, fitting the choice of the genre and the location. The fights usually come down to suddenly being bombarded with enemies that have a range of attacks and needing to bottleneck them so that they can't get you from the side and have long enough time to break their defense. These fights are usually quite easy to predict, so rarely have the surprise factor to them. The camera usually highlights when the fight is beginning by zooming in on an enemy in slow-mo, and highlights it ending by zooming in on the final enemy killed for that wave. I'm very grateful for that first zoom in, as otherwise it would be incredibly easy to get flanked and ganked, as that often still happens. It doesn't feel tense, it just feels cheap and annoying to get flanked and ganked so often. Perhaps having the camera in a different position would help, or perhaps pacing out the fights so that they aren't in a massive wave would fix that. I think the final zoom in breaks the tension, as you know that you're safe from there on, but the game kinda needs it, as it seems to have been designed to have waves of combat followed by exploration. I wish that they had given the enemies a bit more of a challenge to them. Perhaps you could shine the light on them in certain spots to weaken them, not just over their entire body, and done away with the waves because the game feels like it's in separate chunks. The enemies are pretty generic, but sometimes have nice lines like "nice night for a midnight stroll" or stuff like that. There are occasionally bosses, which are essentially a character that you met earlier, just turned evil, and they are just slightly harder to target with more lines of dialogue, but otherwise offer absolutely nothing new, no way to test the player. The game also has inanimate objects fly towards you and bash you up. They can only be beat with the flashlight, but generally each object requires more than one battery to continuously attack and beat it, and when they hit hard. Hitchcock also offers up his birds to attack Alan, and they swoop in unpredictable ways. Now, Remedy, if you're listening, I have 2 suggestions to greatly improve the narrative as well as the gameplay. Either make the game a kind of Metroidvania, where in day sections you walk about a single map, talking to people, unique characters, and learning more about the environment, and then in the night sections those people become possessed, and you can defeat them or try to find a way to spare them, so that in the morning they're either still about or erased from the game they're on. That would give the game much more of like a connection to the fight, to the combat mechanics. It would have much more weight. My second idea is to have just no human enemies, as it seems really crazy to have hundreds of nameless, faceless lumberjacks that want to kill Wake, yet no one in town seems to know or care about these people. Instead, just have the birds and the objects attack Wake, further pushing the idea that this could just be Alan's fears attacking him. It's also worth noting that towards the end of the game, the enemy encounters got to the point where they had such an advantage that it broke the flow of the story and had me getting just frankly bored. The game also sometimes shows hints that it wants to have a kind of puzzle platformer element, with Alan knocking down things to create a path or such stuff, but it's never fully embraced, and it would do really well to have some puzzles in the game rather than just key collecting. Speaking of collecting, Alan can collect up to 100 coffee thermoses on his journey, which is kind of a nice addition, but perhaps doesn't add anything beyond trophy hunting. One has to go out of one's way to get the thermos, and that's all they're rewarded with. No extra story, no insight, just a number clicking up. Of course, I didn't actually get all 100 in my playthrough, so I don't know if it unlocks anything other than just an achievement, but after a certain point, I really stopped caring. Insight, however, is offered by pages from Wake's book, found breadcrumbed on the path through the game, with some hidden away. This is nice because it does offer character and plot insight, but it's also kind of heartbreaking to see that some pages are locked away for the hardest difficulty only. After seeing that, I decided I wouldn't search for them all, even though I wanted to hear more about the story, because I knew that I wouldn't get every single one. This would be a really good segue to talk about the story, but perhaps fittingly, I can't move on without talking about the pacing. Something about the pacing is just thoroughly off. For example, the dialogue is performed brilliantly, and each voice actor does a fantastic job. But it's been cut together as if perhaps the director of the game just wanted to push you along, which makes everyone feel like a video game character, rather than a living, breathing character, and misses the mark of languid mystery that I think that they're trying to get.
I don't like any of it. It's not good. In fact, it's the absolute opposite of good.
As previously mentioned, the flow of gameplay seems to be broken into divisions, meaning that there isn't really the feeling of unknown as there should be. You do get a bit of downtime when you find a radio, offering insight from the DJ character and then a tone-setting song.
It sounds serious, Pat. I'm telling you, it don't sound like no party.
I'm certainly going to give the station a call, Milt.
Okay.
You'll hear it here as soon as I hear from them.
Okay, thanks.
And also a break when you find a TV to play a Twilight Zone ripoff. But sadly they don't often reflect the events of the game, like the TV show in Twin Peaks did.
Especially in Night Springs. Tonight's episode, The Man in the Mirror.
He's inside, Agent. He's a weird one.
So, you're confessing to killing that guy, huh? Why?
Had it coming?
And the cars in the game are an absolute joke too. I kinda get it, you need the cars to emulate the feeling of having a sweeping American landscape, and to add scope to the narrative. But while you're in a car, you're absolutely safe. Even if the car does take damage, it won't really affect your gameplay. And you just whip by everything, making the sense of exploration and intrigue diminish. And geez, the less said about the camera is the better. It's just, oh my word, it will just make you sick. But the worst offender of all the pacing is being able to stop and watch real commercials for real life products in the middle of one of the more interesting sequences. What an absolute pity. Just like picking up your Energizer batteries to save your life, this sequence sends an odd message that there is no urgency to anything that you're doing and takes you completely out of the built-up world just to show you the same old rubbish you'd see on TV. It felt like the Truman Show. Why am I getting a commercial in the middle of my action sequence?
Want access to thousands of applications? Verizon Wireless has you covered. Check out the latest games. Discover new music and old favorites. Social networking, sports scores, news, it's all at your fingertips. No matter what you're into, Verizon Wireless can satisfy your never-ending appetite for apps. Check out VCast apps and load up your phone.
It's such a shame because, as I said, the influence of Lynch, Hitchcock, Kubrick, Twilight Zone and Stephen King lead to an interesting narrative. At once it struck me. What quality went from a man of achievement, especially in literature, and which Shakespeare possessed so enormously? I mean, negative capability. That is when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. Coleridge, for instance, would let go by a fine, isolated verisimilitude, caught from the penetralium of mystery, from being incapable of remaining content with half-knowledge. This pursued through volumes would perhaps take us no further than this, that with a great poet the sense of beauty overcomes every other consideration, or rather, obliterates all consideration. That's Keats writing in a letter about how there is a certain value to suspending disbelief and allowing mystery to stay as a mystery. To explain a mystery withholds the reader of the infinite possibilities that their mind can create to fill the gap. After all, the imagination is the greatest tool in a story writer's kit, and a mystery explained is simply no longer a mystery, just a set of events that happen. Of course, the mystery must actually have an answer somewhere, even if it is untold, because equally, if it has no grounding, then it is of no consequence, and has no bearing on the human psyche. There's something about our brains that knows when something's entirely without an answer, and the only answer created is, it's a mystery. We soon lose interest. This is part of why JJ Abrams is the absolute worst storyteller in recent times. He openly admits to not having an answer for his mystery.
I bought this decades ago, and I'm not kidding. If you look at this, you'll see it's never been opened. But I've had this forever.
See Lost, Star Wars, Star Trek, pretty much anything he's worked on. So once the spectacle is worn off, again, Abrams does this in the cheapest way possible, the audience is left feeling kind of empty. Just like how you can gorge on McDonald's and then be hungry an hour later. To be clear, mysteries shouldn't give you all the answers, but the answers should definitely be there. The joy of a mystery is knowing that there's a solution and seeing if you can figure it out. Sometimes taking delight that you may or may not be right in your solution. Here's the thing, you're always right in your own headcanon. As we are introduced to the world of Bright Falls and Alan Wake, we are eased in like Twin Peaks and The Shining, and then quickly fed breadcrumbs of ideas, clues, red herrings, and questions. The writer, Alan Wake, comes to the Cascadian town to take a break. He's had a writer's block for 2 years, and things might not be going perfectly with his wife. It's mentioned thoroughly that he is such a popular writer that his books sell incredibly well, and is recognizable by face. Quite rare for writers. So the concept that Alan may have stresses from that is brought forward, and it's mentioned a few times that he can be prone to violent outbursts of paparazzi and such. Alan's wife is taken abruptly by an evil presence, and Alan loses a week to a blackout, awakening in a crashed car before being met with murky evil beings, and a man in a diver's suit comes to offer some guidance. It would be natural to assume that this is in Wake's mind, But soon other characters confirm that they can see the same things, and that the destruction also affects them and their world. At one point, Wake awakes in a bed of a mental hospital, being told that everything has been a dream and that his wife was dead all along. But then this is quickly uprooted to be a red herring, although personally I think that there is a strong case for it actually being true, that Wake's subconscious is breaking through for a moment, before recreating the same destruction and madness he was experiencing before in the Jacob's Ladder of a nightmare. We find that the evil presence was and is an entity that resides in the lake, and, kind of like making a deal with the devil, the presence offers artists a chance to create freely at the cost of something very dear, usually a loved one or what seems to be your soul. Oddly enough, that was also the motivation of the psychiatrist who lies to Wake about his wife being dead, further pushing my belief that that is the actual truth of the narrative. But that's just my opinion. The art that Alan is creating is his final book that he's been stuck on for 2 years, which turns out to be the story of the game, even including him finding the pages of the book, because they want to keep you guessing and keep turning everything in on itself. The narrative that Alan writes includes him finding the pages about him writing his story. We also learn that the diver is Thomas Zane, a previous victim of the lake that Alan wrote into the story to offer himself guidance and leave those pages behind, so that he will be prepared for what comes next. Strangely, Zane seems to have also written about Wake, so we could assume that either the entire thing is something that Wake has written, evil presence, Zane, needing to go to Bright Falls, everything, and we are simply experiencing what could be in his book. Or that the entire thing could actually be Zane's story, or perhaps Zane and Wake are the actual same person. Really, to hammer in the Twin Peaks comparison, Wake enters the dark realm in the lake to release his wife at the end of the game, and Zane reveals that a doppelganger is being freed to take Wake's place. Wake says, it's not a lake, it's an ocean. And then the game ends. I looked online to see what the fanbase makes of this, and I saw one theory that Wake is being literal, that the lake extends so far into the depths of the earth that it reaches hell. This theory does make it a pretty simple idea, that Wake has made a deal with the devil, and so has been sucked into hell. I think that's a fine conclusion, and I partially agree. But I also feel like I lean more towards the idea that Wake is actually Zane, or that he is actually in a psychiatric ward. Part of me has this feeling that Alice and Alan are actually the same person, just the light and dark of one persona, and that Alan Wake is not his name. It just seems too easy that his name spells awake. Perhaps it is Thomas Zane needing some kind of signal to himself, or as the character of a Zane story. But that's not truly the end. Alan Wake has 2 DLC episodes and a spin-off standalone American Nightmare. I'm yet to play an American Nightmare, but I certainly will pretty soon. As for the 2 episodes, I've simply had to watch them on YouTube. It's a shame because these sections seem to have far more of the psychological that the cover art promised, and they look to be what would have been the most interesting part to explore as you play Alan's rational self, exploring the dreamland of the dark presence he has entered. Alan explores this world that is turning in on itself, shaking him about while he talks to Zane, slowly getting closer to some kind of truth. Once again, ending abruptly as Wake starts a follow-up to his book, teasing a possible sequel. Part of me wants to see the return of Wake. Part of me feels that leaving the whole thing on an open ending is the best choice, allowing you to have that artistic choice of the mystery in your own headcanon, just as Keats said. Hey, Twin Peaks returned 25 years after a drift into the Black Lodge. Maybe Wake will too.
I'll see you again in 25 years. Meanwhile.
Hey, thanks for watching. In this video, I only briefly touched upon my personal theories and inclinations about the mysteries and plot points in Alan Wake. Hopefully those ideas can help you to think about Alan Wake and mysteries in general in a different light. Of course, you might have your own personal theories about Alan Wake, or there may even be stronger theories out there already. We can delve deeper into the discussion down in the comments. And while you're here, this video took me a bit longer to make than I originally expected, and that's mostly due to the fact that the humidity in Japan has already shot right up, so editing the video would just put me to sleep. So if you can support me on Patreon, a couple dollars will go towards turning on the air conditioner, power the air conditioner, power the channel. It will also fund my other artistic endeavors such as painting and also a small podcast that I've started up. You can find information at Patreon, link in the description. So once again, thanks for checking out the video. Enjoy yourself.